talking with someone well-known in Calhoun County, served on the Calhoun County Board. Local attorney Jim Haadsma is with us, and good morning to you, Jim. Nice to see you.
Good morning, Tim. Merry Christmas to you.
Yep, and same to you. You ran for the State House in the 62nd District, a year and a half ago, in 2016.
That's correct, in 2016.
And then I think it was, a week or so ago, you announced your intent to run again.
I did.
For the 62nd. I mean, why would you want to do a thing like that? Don't you have enough to do in the course of a day?
I do. I get a lot of energy, though, Tim, from doing this. Some guys like to golf, and I like to meet people and hear a lot of stories and try to change our community so we have more opportunities for more members of our Battle Creek area.
How long were you on the county board? Quite
8 years.
Yeah, 8 years. That's a long time. What are some things that transpired in county government during that period that you like to point to and say, hey, I was part of that?
In terms of the county, we did a lot of consolidation in relation to the Consolidated Dispatch Center, which I think has provided some benefits in terms of sharing of resources and obligations. We did the same thing in relation to experience with the Jackson County Road Commission, where we shared resources by our road commission and then road department with the Jackson County Road Commission. And then we, in fact, I think to save money and provide better road service to the citizens of Calhoun County, actually absorbed the road commission about 5 years ago and made that the road department. And I think that the road department has been delivering better than did the former road commission.
How did you feel the county board worked together as a team when you were part of it?
I thought it worked well together as a team. I think that Calhoun County is fortunate to have an excellent county administrator in Kelly Scott. She does a lot of the day-to-day lifting. The county board does the policy setting, and I think all of us got along well. And with Kelly Scott and Brad Wilcox and others on the executive team, we managed to bring, I think, good government to Calhoun County.
And, of course, when you're at the city level and the county level, partisan politics is certainly there, but just not as much of a factor as all of a sudden, I think, when you jump to the state level or the federal level. And it seems like there's a lot of polarization more than ever now. It's almost like you can't be a candidate for everybody anymore. You got to pick a side. Do you feel that as you go into this election?
I'm someone who's going to vote and take positions in the manner my conscience tells me to do, not based upon what a caucus might direct me to do. I agree that there are more polarities than there certainly were 35 plus years ago. I think probably since around 1980, there's been a devolution in relation to I got you before you got me kind of politics. And I'd like to ensure that Calhoun County, or at least the 62nd District, Battle Creek and Albion, and the townships connecting those cities have a representative who can get beyond that and work well across the aisle.
You ran in 2016, as we mentioned, for the 62nd State House. What did you learn in that process, and are you going to do anything differently in this race?
It's always beneficial to have an exhibition season, as it were, to have an experience. It was the closest state house race in the state. 209 votes separated me from the winner in that race. Sometimes you can give your very best and make the best arguments and show up at all the events and raise the money, and there are variables that you can't control. 2016 had a variable in which straight party voting brought some surprising results to Calhoun County and surprising results
to the nation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
the Trump factor. Sure.
I think 2018 will be a different year, but I'm not inexperienced enough to handicap that race at this point because there are a lot of things that can happen in 1 year. Certainly, I couldn't have predicted at the outset of 2016 what happened in November 2016. I certainly couldn't have predicted in November 2016 a special election in Alabama in which a Democratic senator goes to Washington. So there are a lot of variables that are certainly going to be in play in the gubernatorial election and down ticket in 2018.
And we should say that you are running as a Democrat in this race. You know, and the Trump factor took a lot of people by surprise, Republicans and Democrats in this country. The fact that the American people stood up and said, you know, we're tired of the status quo, and they rolled the dice and took a chance on a Trump administration. Does that say anything to you and members of your party and how you approach representing the public?
I think you're correct. That is, people were willing to take a chance on something different, way out of the box, in a way that I certainly didn't perceive would be other than a very risky chance. I think that what just took place in Alabama tells me that we have to work very hard at all parts of Michigan in relation to the Democratic Party going forward. Not take any areas, say Athens, say Homer, for granted, and work very hard in relation to those voters who we might have historically thought would be more likely to vote Democratic. We can't take certain sectors for granted, and I think Alabama showed that. The African-American vote, the women vote came out very heavily, and we have to work hard in areas where, in some respects, we haven't worked hard before, some of the rural areas, and we have to work harder in the areas where we've done well in the past and should have done better in 2016.
Well, and I think the 62nd District has always been I mean, you know, in Alabama, ever since the boll weevil Democrats fell out of favor back in the 60s, a Democrat can't get elected dog catcher down there because that's just the way it is in that part of the country. But in the 62nd District, it's pretty even, wouldn't you say, between Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, whatever you want to call it. I mean, the partisan politics is not such a huge factor in this district, is it?
I think you're correct. It is quite even in the 62nd. This is a seat that whichever party wins often has majority in the state house during that term. I think that in the main, looking back to when Eric Bush and then Mark Schauer, Kate Siegel, Mike Knopfs, John Bison have had it, it seems to have been not an especially partisan House district, but it's always been a district in play. That is to say, it's not a district that, and especially this time with an open seat, it's not a district that either the Republicans or the Democrats just take for granted and assume one or the other might win, which, for example, is more likely in the 63rd District, in which Marshall is located, in which Schoolcraft, Comstock, Climax, Scotts are located.
Yeah, so along with that, then, I'm guessing the Democratic Party in Michigan has said, hey, this is a really important district. We think we can win it. We're going to give you $1 million, Jim, or at least more support than maybe some other candidates get. Are you feeling that they're going to step up for you?
Yes, although I don't feel like they're going to give me $1 million, but I certainly tell them that I got that from the host of WBCK. No, they were very supportive of my run in 2016 and have been very supportive in relation to encouraging me to do it again in 2018. I did get a lot of support in 2016 and expect to have similar support in 2018. And again, it's a privilege for me to have the opportunity to do it and receive the encouragement to undertake another run because of the opportunity to meet so many different people and try to strive hard to build a better 62nd District, build a better Battle Creek.
And when you announced that you were running, you talked about how Battle Creek's struggling and Calhoun County and Michigan citizens, and you identified certain areas that you think need to be looked at, addressed, and changed. And Jim, you said that a lot of the legislation that's come about in recent years out of Lansing that has been short-sighted. You have an example of a couple of things that you think were short-sighted and specifically hurt our area?
Sure. I think some taxation policy enacted by the state legislature and signed into law by the governor has been short-sighted. For example, the taxation on pensions of seniors in Michigan. I too think that the elimination of the homestead property tax credit and elimination of the child tax credit has been very short-sighted and has made fewer dollars available for members of our state, members of our community. And when those dollars aren't available, I think I cited that the average Michigander has, middle-class Michigander has $6,000 less in real income now than 10 or so years ago. Well, that's just fewer monies going into businesses, and certainly in Battle Creek, where we have not only large stores like Macy's and JCPenney's closing, but also smaller restaurants and local mom-and-pop stores, it indicates that there's not enough money circulating in our community. We need to make sure that people have more money, and specifically middle-class and working-class people have more money to send into our economy. When you talk about the homestead property tax credit, now, they didn't eliminate it, did they? Didn't they just tell you people that, if you're already on 100% assistance, you can't claim it? There was a diminution in the opportunity to claim those tax credits to individuals, and those are the individuals who probably need the money most. Without question, I think our community, and I see this in my law practice all the time, is full of more financially challenged people than certainly I recall back in, say, the mid-'90s. What as far as, the taxation issue, though, I mean, isn't all this sort of aimed at what a lot of people say is our number one problem, and that is a lack of jobs in industry? I mean, how do you balance that? Without question, we have to try some other tax strategies, like ensuring that in terms of corporate taxation, employers are given some tax credits for hiring some challenged in terms of disability or in terms of financial status workers. So we have to do more to bring good jobs to our community, both in terms of tax strategies and in terms of ensuring that our infrastructure is such that corporations will want to come here, that we don't have crumbling roads, we don't have bridges that are in great need of repair. The current 62nd state representative, Dr. John Bison, a Republican, will be running for the state Senate seat, so he'll be actually vacating the seat, which I believe you mentioned the seat would be vacant. Our other area representative in the 63rd District, Republican Dave Maturin, these guys have introduced a fair amount of legislation. They seem to be kind of aimed at areas that they are expert in, and kind of pet issues, I guess you would say. Representative Maturin is a former tax assessor and seems to understand all of that and has been kind of working in some of those areas in terms of the black box, the large store taxation issues. Dr. Bison, some medical issues. Do you have any areas that you're thinking, Jim Haadsma is going to champion this if he gets elected? Well, first let me talk about the dark stores issue, or black box issue, as you called it. That's something Dave Maturin introduced, and it hadn't passed in last session. I don't think it's passed this session, but I think it's a really important piece of legislation. And were I elected in 2018 to go to Lansing, I think I could work very well with Representative Maturin to ensure that that passes. I well understand the issues that are affecting local government because of lack of state revenue sharing to local government, and something like how the dark stores taxation happens presently, absent Representative Maturin's legislation, that really impacts negatively on local revenues. So I certainly would join Representative Maturin in championing something like that, which would be a boon were it to pass to our county and our municipal governments.
That black box issue, I mean, doesn't this present system give big advantages to huge companies such as a Walmart or a big company if they shut down a store and mothball it?
Yes.
And they don't then have to pay taxes. It's to their advantage to keep the thing sitting there empty and falling down.
The tax tribunal made a decision a few years ago which allowed this creative and very big box store happy taxation, which again keeps those properties from being taxed in the way that they should be, and keeps that revenue away from local governments like the county and like the city.
Mm-hmm. But back to the question of then, what are some areas that Jim Haadsma wants to target if he's elected to go to the State House in Lansing?
I'd like to restore some of the tax credits I've described earlier. I'd like to take a crack at repeal right to work. I don't think that that's been a good idea. I think that 5 years has shown that right to work doesn't work. It means right to work for less. I think that there are issues in the unemployment compensation insurance system. There is a package of bills that's, I think, being voted on this week, or perhaps was just voted on yesterday, that brings some restoration of fairness to the unemployment compensation system. But I'd like to make sure that there are more changes made in that unemployment compensation system, so it's not frightening to people to make an application for unemployment compensation were their employment to be interrupted.
And I should say, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, but I mean, these issues border a lot on what you do in daily life in your law practice in terms of labor issues and pay issues and some of these things. That's certainly an area you're familiar with.
Sure. I haven't talked about workers' disability compensation. That's what I'm most familiar with. That's how I practice. That's what I've done for over 30 years, and certainly the Snyder administration and the Michigan legislature changed that process up in a way that it's just not fair. And anybody who is in the system or works in the system can tell you that that change 6 years ago in December 2011 has been remarkably unfair and tilts the field very significantly in favor of employers vis-a-vis employees. There's just been so many things like that in the last 7 years that just haven't worked. Emergency managers, and I'm very pleased that the legislators came to a compromise which didn't include emergency managers overseeing local governments in relation to their strategizing for retirees' pensions and retirees' health coverage. I do think, because the emergency manager system has not worked, as demonstrated in Flint and the Detroit Public Schools, but I do think that we have to be very creative about doing something to shore up local governments to make sure that we're just not kicking the can in relation to retirees' pensions and retirees' health coverage, right. Because quite honestly, I think that is a miasma just waiting to happen. And I don't think emergency managers are the answer, but I definitely think that we need to address that more aggressively and not just wait for the next legislature's term to address that.
Well, there's certainly an issue for another day, pensions and some of these communities that have some pretty steep obligations to meet, and they need a plan. We'll talk to you next time about what that plan might be, and I'm sure we'll talk to you a lot over the course of the next year, or 8 months, 11 months, whatever it is, before the election. Jim Haadsma, candidate for the 62nd State House District here on WBCK. Thank you, Jim.